Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. We are here today at Vegas Forge. We're down in Las Vegas on a company trip and we thought we'd stop by. We're here with Jeff. He's one of the co-owners here at Vegas Forge. They make some really cool exotic materials. They specialize in Damascus steel, but they also do other things like the makume gane you've seen me do in a previous video. So I thought it'd be really interesting to come here and show you guys just kind of the whole process that we go through. So we'll start from just the raw material. We'll start with the strips of the steel and then we kind of fold it up. And we'll show you how they do the patterning process. We need to weld it all together over at a forge, and we've got these huge power hammers back here. So there's gonna be a lot of really fun, really cool, interesting steps, and it'll kind of give you guys a much better look, because in my other videos, we just start with the raw material and we make a ring from it, and it looks just like any other ring that I make. So I thought this would be a special video. I hope you guys really enjoy it, and let's go ahead and get started. So our first step over here, we're starting with these two big spools of two different types of stainless steel. And the goal here is to just cut out specific lengths. I'm gonna have Jeff explain it a little more in detail so you can kind of get a better idea of how it all works.
So to create the Damascus look and the different patterns, we use two different alloys. We have our 302, which is gonna be your contrast. That's gonna be the shiny metal and your ABL. So what we do is we just feed this through here. Got a specific length, and then we'll just cut. Keep feeding, and we do that. We do about 99 of these and 100 of the ABL, and that way when we stack it and alternate it, we're able to create the random pattern. So that's one of the, so each pattern has a different way that it's stacked.
So over here on our next step, what we've got our two different alloys, and we're just stacking them up here inside this little metal box we've got here. So we're just stacking up, and you can see how many there are. There's 200 total, like you were saying over there. And so just stacking them up, alternate them every time. And then once we've got them all in here like we do now, we need to seal off the entire box. And so what they do is they just, I'm certain you've got another piece that you end up putting here, and then you weld it shut and they get it completely airtight. So that's super important. They gotta make sure they've got a perfect seal on it because that will prevent any oxidation. If you didn't do that, you'd run into all sorts of issues. So we're gonna head over. We've got a box already prepared like that, and then our next step will be throwing it in the forge. So we'll head over now.
This is a box all welded up on all sides. It's airtight. Weld a handle on it, so when we're putting it in and pulling it out of the forge, we have something to grab onto. Kind of heavy.
This is way heavy. I'm a wimp. I cannot even I literally could not do the forging step. I'm not strong enough. So our next step, we're gonna take this whole big block, we're gonna put it over in the forge. It's gonna heat up to 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we'll go over to the power hammer, and that's where we'll forge weld all the layers together. Okay, so once that's done in the forge, they take it over to the power hammer, and we've just got a block here already. What they do is they smash it down, they flatten out all the edges, make sure it's super square and all that. They'll then cut off the handle like we were talking about earlier that they used to put it into the forge, and then that shell, it just kind of falls off that they welded around it earlier. And so we're just left with this pure block of this Damascus steel. And they didn't show some of the steps. They've got like some secret little things they do, but that's basically the process in a nutshell. And then they'll cut off a piece. So we start from a big block like this, cut off a section, and then we'll be left with something like this, and they reattach another handle. And then now, from this point, this is where they'll draw it out. They use the hammer, so it goes right back into the forge, and that's where we're going to show the power hammering here in a second. So after a few minutes in the forge, the block is red hot, and it's ready to be worked with on the power hammer, and he's just drawing it out to length here. He's trying to make everything square, and he's just slowly getting it to the length he wants, and he has to go back to the forge quite a few times just to heat it up once again. And then he comes back, he gets it the length he wants, and then that's when he starts rounding it off a little bit. So he'll make it an octagon at first, he'll just flatten all the edges of it, and then he'll repeat that process again and again until he's got a pretty nice round shape to it. Not perfect, but enough so that once it's twisted, there's not a lot of work to do on the lathe. And you'll notice he's leaving one of the ends square, and that's because he needs to fit it in the pipe threader, and that's what they use to twist the piece of Damascus. That's what gives it that twist pattern. It kind of looks like wood grain, that natural look. So as he twists it, you'll notice that he's using this compressed air and spraying it at it, and what he's doing is he's trying to control where the piece twists. So if it's twisting too fast in a certain section, he needs to cool it off, make it a little bit more rigid. That way way they get an even, nice, consistent twist pattern all throughout the whole piece of steel. And then at this point, we're pretty close to being done. They need to anneal it, and that's a 12-hour process. They put it in a kiln, and the purpose of the annealing is to soften the metal a little bit. It makes it machinable so you can actually make stuff out of it. And then now we're ready to switch over to the final step, and that's going to be on the lathe, and that's just trimming it down so it's nice and consistent and ready to ship. So now we've got our finished rod off the lathe. You can see this is just over a foot, and this is a massive piece of Damascus steel. You can make so many rings out of this. And just if you're curious, that big block that we started out with when we were just stacking up those sheets of metal, that makes about anywhere from like 5 to 8 feet of steel, depending on how big of a diameter you want. So that was the process that goes into making this. This was really cool and interesting to see, and there's just so much time and effort that goes into getting a rod to this point. So we're gonna head back over to Utah. We're gonna make a ring out of some Damascus. I'm really excited to get back into it. Now that I've seen how it's made, it's kind of just lit that fire in me to want to make some more Damascus steel stuff. So I just want to say thank you so much to Jeff and Jesse here at Vegas Forge. And Jeff actually has a special announcement for you guys, so take it away.
Well, we appreciate you guys coming by. It was nice meeting you and being able to show you the process. And need to hammer out some details, but we'd like to do a giveaway, and stay tuned for that, and keep you updated.
Yep, I'll have all the details at the end of the video because we don't know what we're gonna do yet. So big thanks to Vegas Forge. I'll have all the links to everything down in the description. Like I said, more about that later. But let's get back over to Utah. All right, so back in Utah, I'm going to be making a ring out of this Spirograph Damascus steel, and this is a very interesting pattern and one that I think will make a really cool looking ring. I want to do a domed profile to this, and I think the doming that I'll do will really help accentuate the pattern that this has. And you'll see just how that looks at the end. You'll see exactly why that curved profile makes it a little bit more interesting. So the first steps, they're fairly standard. I'm using this center drill to carve out the middle, and then I switch over to a boring bar. And I had to use that center drill, that was to open it up so that I could fit the boring bar in. And then once I've got it to that point, it's just fairly straightforward. I take my boring bar and it's just got this piece of tungsten carbide on the end of it. And the boring bar actually holds these tungsten carbide bits. And it allows me to just slowly trim away the inside of it. I'm just gonna keep going till I get the inner diameter that I want. I'm going to stop just slightly before the final ring size that I want. And that'll give me some room when I come back later, and I'm going to be doing a little bit more sanding to it, and then we'll get it to the exact size that we want. So we're done with the inside for now, but this ring was a little bit crooked, so I need to face off the edges of it. That way all the faces of it will be perfectly parallel to each other. So I put it back in the lathe jaws and I just trim down the edges of each side, and that leaves us with a much more even ring. Now I'm switching over to this expanding ring mandrel, and that'll be to machine the outer diameter of the ring. And you'll notice that I use a very similar tungsten carbide lathe bit, and I just use that to trim down the outer diameter. I want it to have an all new surface, that way it's perfectly concentric with the inner diameter. And then I just use my calipers and I measure exactly how far I want to trim it down and get that final outer diameter that I want. And then now to do the dome finish, the way I do it is I start off by beveling each side. If you do it this way, it's a lot easier to get it all even. If you just start sanding it randomly, it's really easy to get lost where you are, and the ring rarely has some good symmetry to it. So I just like to freehand it with the lathe bits the best I can, get it to the point where it's fairly rounded off. Then I switch over to 60 grit, which is really rough on my Dremel, and then I carefully sand each side by eye, and I just slowly sand it away until I've got it exactly how I want it. Now it's time for sanding and polishing, so I'm starting with about 100 grit sandpaper, and that's to get rid of any of the lines that were left by the 60 grit Dremel. And so I spend a little bit of time on that, and I make sure to get rid of all those marks. And then I switch over to the 220, and then I just work my way up. I do about 5 different levels of sandpaper, all the way up to about 12 to 1500, just depending on what I've got handy. And then on this ring, I even use this micro mesh block to give it just a little bit better of a finish. And this goes from about 2000 all the way up to 6000, depending on which side you use. So now we've got a very nice finish on there. You can see it's still pretty reflective, even though we haven't gone over to the polishing wheel. So this is a very nice and very smooth finish. And then our final shaping step is going to be putting the comfort finish on the inside of the ring. And so I'm using the Dremel here, and I'm just grinding a rounder profile to the inner diameter. That'll make the ring a lot more comfortable to wear. And then of course, after I do that, I repeat the same steps I did on the outside. I just sand it through all the different grits and get a nice polish on there. And then as a final step, like I said, I'm using this felt polish bit on the Dremel, and I'm just using that to polish the ring up, get it so it's got a really nice shine to it. This is a little bit overkill. We're going to be dunking it in acid and then kind of redoing the finish here in a second, but sometimes it's fun to just make it perfect and flawless as possible. And then when you're doing a round profile to it like this, it really does help a little bit to have that nice reflection on there. That makes it really easy to check how well you've done the profiling to it. Now it's going to be time for the final 2 steps here. We're getting really close to being finished, so this is the point where it gets really exciting on these Damascus steel rings. We're going to etch it in acid, and that will reveal the texture and the pattern that it has. And then I'm going to very carefully sand the raised ridges on the ring, and what that'll do is put a shiny finish on that. And then the lower portions, those will still have that matte finish to them. And so the contrast between the two, it just looks really cool when you do it this way. And so to etch it, I'm just putting it in this acid. This is 1 part muriatic acid and 1 part hydrogen peroxide. And in total, I left it in here for about an hour. And I flipped it around a couple times to make sure there wasn't any unevenness to the etch. Then pretty quickly this was done, and it was so cool to pull it out. I haven't actually done a spirograph with this rounded profile before, and I was really anxious to see what it actually looked like. What I like about it is just the fact that it's curved. It's able to cut into a lot of different portions of the pattern, and it just shows itself off really well in my opinion. And then as the finishing touches, like I was saying, we need to sand the ridges of it. And so I do the inside first, and I start with a rougher grit and then work my way up to a smoother one. That way there won't be any visible sanding marks. And then just repeat that step, and this ring is done. And I just think it looks incredible. It looks so good and so detailed, and I just think it looks really good in the photos. I was able to have a lot of fun just taking photos from all different angles, trying out different lighting. It's just so cool to be able to finish up the ring, get it looking exactly how you want it, and then go take photos of it and just have those turn out even better than you were expecting. It's just so great when it turns out that way. But as always, guys, I want to know what you think, so leave your comments down below. I know this is more of a simple ring, but I think that's what makes it pretty cool. So let me know if there's any thoughts, or maybe something you changed to the design, for example. And of course, last but not least, we are doing the giveaway. I did not forget about that. There will be a link down in the description that you can click on, and that'll take you to a Gleam giveaway. Gleam is a website that hosts giveaways, and they just do a really good job at it. They give you a lot of different flexibility and then different options to enter. So there will be a link to that down below, and we're going to be giving away 3 different pieces of Damascus steel. So there's going to be 3 separate winners. This will be international. You don't have to pay for shipping, anything like that. And each of the 3 winners will be given a piece of Damascus steel, just a disc. It's going to be big enough to make a ring out of. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
And
So our first... That is loud.
yes.